Hey, everybody. We had Joe Lewis on the Sunday show, and we clipped out the interview. Here's the viral clip that inspired me to reach out to him.
Do you believe that you have a different relationship with the social and political systems in society based on who you are? You are a white, I'm assuming middle-class Asian American. White presenting, I should say. So you're white.
I'm white presenting?
Wait.
What?
What?
A white presenting Asian.
What the heck?
Let me rephrase that.
Can you look at me right now?
Interestingly enough, Joe got pushback from both the left and the right of people calling him racist over that clip. I think many of us will agree that is kind of racist, but Joe turned out to be a great sport for this rather contentious dialogue, and here's the interview. What is white privilege? I'm a little lost here.
White privilege, which for me is just the prioritization of the expectations, needs, wants, and desires of white people.
Okay.
The problem is that this isn't something that's just going to be like from a social aspect. It's something that's going to happen.
Don't white people have different needs and wants? I mean, no, a lot of white people in the election though voted for Biden, and a lot of white people voted for Trump. So, I mean, those are different desires, definitely, like polar opposite desires. Like, the thing that always confuses me is, like, you're basically making an argument for racial profiling by saying that you know, whites have one desire, which is I don't see how is much different than the racial profiling argument that I am against. I'm certain you are against for blacks and police. I mean, it's just a different type of bad racial profiling.
Anyway, hi, Joe.
Oh, Joe's here.
What's up? How's it going?
What's up?
Snuck in. What's going on?
Good. Just hanging in there.
Awesome. Why don't you tell our audience who you are?
Joe, I'm not on 1 second, Joe, I'm not on camera. Do you mind if I put your picture up on camera? I just feel I should ask beforehand.
Yeah, okay. No, that's fine. Whatever you want to do.
And we also have the clip. We can put the clip in the watch together window if you don't mind watching it, but for context. But you said you were cool with talking about it, just so we can tell people. Let's not play it immediately. Let's talk about it a little bit. And as Sitch said, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'm Joe Lewis, and I stream on Twitch by the name of DumaDamu. So it's like twitch.tv/DumaDamu. And yeah, I'm on panels every once in a while when need be. Some places that people see me or know me from are usually in Dylan's space. Dylan is in Dylan Burns TV, or through Prime Kai's space for his like open night panels and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. How did you find out about us? Because I always feel like no one knows anything about us.
I reached out to him.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay. Yes. I thought it was the inverse.
Sitch, I try to do some booking for the show occasionally.
I forgot. Adam is a professional and an adult here. So.
You do a lot of work on the actual production of the show, but I try to keep things interesting. So I reached out to him because there was a clip, and there was a clip going around on Twitter that you had made a reaction on one of these panels. I think it might have been Dylan's Burns. And you had said, you had called somebody white presenting or something like that, and people kind of freaked out a bit. You want to give your, is that a fair assessment of what happened?
Yeah, sure. So the person in question was Kenny Zhu. And he was talking about he was pushing back on the idea of identity politics. I was trying to lay out to him how his identities, what he visibly presents as and what he doesn't present as, dictates and navigates how he talks about politics, how he talks about society and economy and shit like that. And I was reading a poll about the sentiment of white Americans as I was going through that. I just said white. So I said something on the lines of, it was like white Asian American, and I corrected myself to saying white presenting when I was trying to say American presenting, and that just didn't go well.
Yeah, he seemed totally offended by it. He was immediately chapped.
Flashback. Absolutely right.
Do you believe that you have a different relationship with the social and political systems in society based on who you are? You are a white, I'm assuming middle-class Asian American. White presenting, I should say.
I'm white presenting.
Wait.
What?
What?
Wait, white presenting Asian.
What the heck?
Let me rephrase that.
Can you look at me right now? This is what. No.
I can simplify that for you. I can simplify that for you if that upset you.
End of flashback.
Yeah,
And the whole panel kind of turned the whole panel kind of turned against you in real time, and then the clip kind of went viral. So
yeah, and then even then, like Kenny and I spoke about it after, and we were able to like clear a lot of things up. But obviously, that doesn't matter. It's the internet. So anything that somebody's gonna be like, yo, this person did some racist shit, they're just gonna fucking roll to the bank with it. And even Kenny's response to it after, like, he cashed in on the idea of like what he thought I was trying to say, and then he just ran to the bank with it. So all the power to him, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a take on any of this, Sitch?
So I guess I don't understand what was your argument and what was his argument, because I haven't seen any of the context of the clip.
Well, he was doing sort of like a general pushback on identity politics. And I was just laying out to him that, like, no, man, like how you present yourself to the world and what people identify you as and what you identify yourself as dictates who you are, and how you talk about politics, how you talk about society, like pretty like basic idea. But a lot of times people like conflate identity politics as this like exclusive thing of talking about race and shit. And it's like, I mean, you can do that, but a lot of times conversations like that go absolutely nowhere.
Well,
you know?
So was his argument that we shouldn't be focusing on these identities and we should be dismantling and deconstructing them?
Yeah, kind of like the generic, like we ought not to be like looking through things from this like identity politics lens. I don't remember the exact characterization, but it was generally like the idea that like identity politics is within the negative, when in reality it's like what we all do, like who we are and how our relationships with society dictates on how we talk about these things, you know?
Yeah, but isn't that I mean, I guess it depends what framework you're coming from, because I don't know what this guy, what's his name? You said Ken?
Kenny Zhu.
Yeah, I don't know if Kenny is, I mean, because if we're coming from it from the liberal perspective, the goal is to dismantle all these identifiers and say that we're operating under some universal humanist kind of perspective of individual rights, and we shouldn't be looking at things according to that lens.
Well, I mean, then they're retarded, and we live in America. So, like, I'd love to be in this world where we can just like ignore identity. You know, that'd be fucking based. So, it'd be great to be like not be racially identified as a Black American every day, but in reality, it's just not how it is. And like there are people who strive towards that liberal goal and that liberal like approach of doing things, and that's all the power to them. But they're gonna die knowing that they're not gonna see the realization of that goal.
So you don't think it's possible? You think this is a fantasy that we could ever dismantle these? That not only dismantle that's a fantasy that we could ever get people to not care about race.
In the current state of affairs in America, it's not possible. I mean, for fuck's sake, we have a census that makes us racially identify and racially categorize ourselves, and then that racial census dictates how politics navigate in society. So like it's all the way down to from the government level. You can resist racialization, and we have questions about it right now. Like there are interesting like questions of reimagining of like this sort of like very rigid observation of what racial categorization is. But in the current state of affairs, you're not going to get these Democrats to go on board with reimagining the census, or Republicans reimagining the census. Well, they're all going to make some grandstand like, oh, one side is doing it for nefarious means or the other. It's like it'll be the same like back and forth.
Well, I mean, would you? Because my understanding was part of the point of having like the races on the census is to see if there's like certain communities that have, problems that need to be identified. And I would assume if you were to advocate for a census that had no race on it, that the Black community or Black activists would be very upset by this thing. You're trying to erase us basically from the conversation.
Can you repeat that one more time? Like, I guess like my pushback on it is the census doesn't do that. The other parts of the institution that is the Census Bureau does that, right? They track different levels of discrimination. They track different levels of how populations shift in certain ways, and even like what people are checking within the census. But when the rubber hits the road of like, okay, if we understand that a group of people is experiencing a level of inequality, the United States government doesn't give a shit. It'll give a shit if it like makes them money in some aspect, and that's all well and good. Like, I guess make your money when you can. But at the end of the day, it's like they don't give a shit about us. Like, it's just kind of been the way of the road. Now we can push in different ways within our communities to try to make our community as we see it better than we left it. But by and large, when it comes to these federal fights, the best we can do is something. But in the end, unless your movement is very, very loud, there isn't going to be much to come to it.
Oh, because I never heard the census brought up in this context. So, I mean, I'm assuming you're not in favor. Are you in favor of dropping the race label from the census or not?
I think there's two parts to it. My gut says yes. My heart says no. Like, we're not in a point in the United States where we have really come to terms with the racialization of individuals, and time again we kind of see pushbacks to it in different ends. You get people on the right who say things like, oh, we ought to not talk about race because it's so long ago, and then you have black people who are like, that's fucking horse shit, what are you talking about? I have people in my family who still suffered from slavery, and then even in the face of that reality you get pushback on the right. Then you have people on the left who don't really understand that, hey, you know, during this time where we decided like, hey, racism bad, there was still a perpetuation of white supremacist rhetoric and ideas in the North during Reconstruction, during the founding, not the founding, but during the recreation, during the Reconstruction era. And it's like, okay, racism manifests itself in different ways in different communities, but the liberals and fucking Democrats in the world want to like slob on each other's knobs, acting like there was no racism in the North. And it's like, that's fucking preposterous. Like, of course there was racism in the North, they're different than racism in the South. So we're not at terms with like what that looks like yet. So while it would be cool to remove racial categorization from the census, that's not going to do anything. We're still going to see these sort of racialized outcomes. And then, like, instead of just being like, hey, you know, in these concentrated areas they have a concentrated group of people experiencing the same phenomena, we should probably address it. And it never really gets that far.
Well, do you think that America's you think America's been going in a positive direction for racial equality? Or
no,
whichever
it hasn't been. It's been comfortable for a lot of people. Like,
I'm sorry, you say has or hasn't?
Hasn't. I mean, I'm not gonna get fucking lynched. Like, that's a great thing, I guess. Or rather, it's like
I guess
that's a good.
That's a great
reality.
Thing.
Like, are we creating a society where individuals can be able to freely navigate in ways that don't have these weird interactions with the state? We're not there yet. That's not exclusively the black people. It happens with Hispanic people. It happens with Asian American. Like, we see the outcomes of these things, and then you don't want to have like people who are like sworn in to protect you say like weird things about your racialized communities. And this happens every once in a while, and then people have been like, oh, it's just one individual cop. And it's like, well, if you have a culture of people and you push this idea that these people interact and navigate in a certain way, that's going to manifest itself in the police. It's going to manifest itself in schools.
Well, but I think we have to separate, because this is kind of, we talked to this guy named Kurt Metzger on Tuesday. It's kind of relevant to this, though it was about Russia, Ukraine. It wasn't about race. Is that, I mean, we have to separate whether we're there, like whether we've created the society we want, and whether our society has progressed, don't we? And that's why it's weird to me to hear you say that we haven't progressed at all from, you know, literally enslaving a people to now we have problems that are different problems, but it's not like slavery and lynching.
I guess it's like, it just depends on what you mean by progress, right? Is that,
well,
we still have
not enslaving people.
Like the overt racism, to the most part, no longer exists in America. Great job, but at the same time, like the very pieces of legislation that were designed to lead to better outcomes are still being stripped by Republicans, are still being stripped by Democrats. Like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act are just a skeleton of what it was when it initially passed. Like, why do we have a situation where we removed pre-clearance in the Voting Rights Act, and then we see that voting discrimination is right along racialized lines, and it's like, oh, the very thing that was designed to keep a tab on future discrimination is removed at the argument that it's too old. Like, my biggest problem with the United States is that, and this is true for any piece of legislation, where, at least for me, is that you can't just pass something and then wipe your hands clean of it thinking that's all there is to it. Like, there has to be checkups, there has to be revisions, because the America in 1964 is totally different than the America in 2022. So how you navigate that, and like the questions that you ask and the problems that are presented from you in the current landscape are going to be different from the landscape in the 1960s, the 70s, and the 80s. But time and time again, we've seen from politicians that they don't give a fuck about that. They just want to fucking get the shit passed so they can shake their hands and move on to the other thing that they're going to push up as something important.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, all politicians are just trying to get reelected. But, I mean, I guess I feel like there's like an like when we talk about like progress and whether society has progressed in some avenue, it's really like we're having a conversation, like that's kind of the mot. And I guess I'm trying to get at what is actually being discussed, because from I can organize this from a very simple way. I want people in communities to have control of their communities. And time again, we have seen that communities don't have control of their own destinies. And what that destiny could be is just the idea that, hey, I want my child to be in a good school and not get fucked around by the police and otherwise. That's not true in every community in the United States. I want my child, despite being in a very poor economic condition, have the tools so that they can build themselves up and do something for themselves. That's true for some, but it's not true for all. So it's going to require different approaches based on where you live, because there's different problems in every community. Like the fucking idea that Democrats fucking push is that the problem isn't fucking voter ID. The idea that black people can't get a voter ID or have a difficulty is a fucking absurd claim. The problem is like, okay, what identification is used to verify your ability to vote? Because then it gets a little bit interesting, because then maybe it's not your school ID and you need a license. And it's like, okay, what resources are you giving to your community, and how are you understanding your community and how they vote? But if you paint this broad, stupid brush that people in your community are having difficulty voting without really talking to those people who are struggling in voting, then what the fuck are you doing? You're claiming to be a problem, and then when it's like the rubber hits the road, like, how do we fix this problem? And it just leads to this like weird back and forth and accentuation of black people. Well, when you say you want communities to have control over their own communities, what is that? Are you saying like...
Yeah, community control of economic frameworks that produce and retail goods and services. So community control of housing, community control of healthcare, community control of education, community control of the very institutions.
So we would have a reduction, I guess, of state and federal standards, and we'd have some kind of community would be created in a location, and they would have complete control over the education and the policing and...
It broadens out, right? Like, you're still going to need to have like certain things, like, for example, right? It starts with your town, then it expands to your county, then it expands to your municipal district. So like that, the larger, for example, like I have representatives in the House of Reps based on my district, that expands to the state, that expands to your tri-state area, and that expands to everything beyond that. And it needs to be this approach of like communicate. All these groups have to communicate with each other in real time, because you're not going to get the type of solutions that communities need if not communicating with each other. And we've seen this work. Like, we've seen examples when things get kind of serious. Like, okay, during COVID-19, we have to do this thing. We have to communicate with local areas as they communicate to the county, which communicate to the district, just communicate all the way up to the federal government. But then there's other aspects where it's like, you don't need to, like, they don't need, I'll put that in very like loose quotes, that you need to be doing that thing. So like, this is one of my problems with the critical race theory bills, is that there is an acknowledgement from parents that there's a problem going on in schools. And despite the fact that these politicians, they don't give a shit. They don't care about CRT. If they cared about CRT, they would actually be in the communities talking to the individuals about like what's going on and the ways of going about it. But when you hear politicians, especially conservative representatives, say things that you need to go to your board meetings and make your voices heard, that's fucking horseshit. That's a lie. They know that like by the time you make it to the board meeting and air out your grievances, it's already too late, because there were multiple meetings before about the policy, whatever policy you're frustrated with. There was already the Q&A about like what the bill should be and what the policy should be and what the policy and practices actually are. But by the time you get to the point of public comment and commenting about these things, it's long over. It's already been decided upon. And then it gets real complicated because even in that frustration of like, all right, these people aren't representing us. What do we do? Well, we ought to go out and get people who support the things that we want in the right seats. And then like that question never comes up of like, okay, who or how do we navigate in the educational politic? Like this, it's never a step that at least I've seen. And that's my point.
Sitch, do you want to get a little more of a back and forth going here? I'm not sure.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. You're hitting a lot of different topics. Sure.
Right. So I'm trying to focus on like
Sitch, what do you want to do? I want to be
I voted like I talked about community control, trying to tie it into community control.
Well, I was going to use the anti-CRT push seems to be local communities kind of pushing their school boards to,
it is local,
to go in a direction, and the school boards, or at least the state governments, are listening to them. Isn't that an example of community control?
No, because why is it up to the state to determine what local schools do? It's not up to the state for doing that. It's within the local district. So like if you care about not having white children get mistreated because of the fact that they are white, why are you not talking to the heads of curriculum about what actually is being taught there? You can call them. Their numbers exist. So like if you believe something to exist within the school district that you're in, you are more than welcome and encouraged to talk to the individuals who are able to change those policies for you. But instead of doing that, you might feel that that's not going to happen. So then you go to the state to cater to that problem. And that to me is horseshit. You shouldn't be relying on the state for stuff like that. You should be pushing for people to be in positions of power in the places that you feel like they need to, because the state isn't going to care. Like you can make some state, every state can pass CRT legislation, and it just takes a Democrat majority to write that shit out. So why are you wasting your time fighting at the state level for something that can be easily removed by Democrats?
Well, it's the same thing from the community level, though, too. If the community shifts its opinion, right? They'll just vote it out.
The community can shift its opinion, but if people aren't there to show that they're in dissent of those opinions, then what are we doing?
It just seems like this would create a lot more division, because you'd have in one state you could have like, I don't know, where there's a more a larger white population. They could complain to their county, and they'll have the school has like anti-CRT stuff, and then in a more black population maybe they'll want pro-CRT stuff, and it just seems like this is create little pockets in this country where there isn't any sort of unified identity whatsoever.
Yeah, but it's designed that way. Like,
but why would you want that though?
We're in a country that's deeply segregated on racialized lines and ideological lines, and you're going to see in a very lot of more like Democrat-centered areas that have more like support of like these ideas of equality, man, and these ideas of like we gotta treat people equally and shit. And then you're gonna have more like right-leaning Republican areas. You're like, no, it's all about the individual. It's the individual that determines these things. Limited government, or as little government as we can. But in reality, is that like the communities are deeply segregated ideologically, deeply segregated lines of race. So the problems that exist because of that are going to be different from one area to another. But by and large, with the stuff with CRT. Again, it's just like my take of like leave things up to the school districts, and if you do not trust that your school districts have the best in mind, there are hundreds of ways that you can go about that. And I think we should be pushing for that instead of like just crying to the state about your problems or crying to the Fed about your problems.
Yeah, but I guess so. But you're saying you're in favor. It seems like you're in favor of hardening these pockets of segregation in our society. By giving these communities more power to segregate themselves further.
Well, what's the solution to that, right? If we understand that people are going to live where they want to live, and the places right now where they want to live are deeply segregated, you're going to have to create some type of incentive system. This is where it broadens out, right? Like you're going to have to create some type of incentive system for people to move in different areas, incentivize moving to those areas. It's like if you're a frustrated New Jerseyan like me, Cory Booker isn't coming to save my ass. Fuck that cunt. Like, he's not saving me and he's not saving any other black person in this state. So what do? We move. But where do we go? Like, not everybody has the economic means to just lift, and even the social means of just lifting up what they want to do and lifting up their life and going somewhere else. That's a very difficult thing. So you need to create something that incentivizes people to go to different areas that they believe is like in the best interest of them and those around them. But that doesn't really happen all the time. So it's like, for a lot of people, by and large, like once they plant their seed where they're at, they're going to stay there and hope that their children stay there and their children stay there. What's that?
They make an investment in a certain area. Obviously,
yeah.
It's a lot of work to move and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and for me, I think that really limits the expression and the ability that people have to be of a diverse environment, right? Like if you live in an area, like take my mother. My mother lived in an area where there was no black people her entire life. Her entire life, she had limited interactions with black people. And then all of a sudden, like she's in a more integrated situation in New Jersey. And then she just like she just has the word nigger floating in her brain all the time. And it's no fault to her own. She lives in an area that openly discriminated against black people. And you're not just going to erase that if you move her to some Democrat state.
I'm confused. Are you saying that your mom is racist? Is that what you're saying?
My mom is white. My mom is white. And she said, I didn't say she was racist. I said she said.
Okay.
So it's like, and that's like, if you believe that to be okay, I mean, that's a thing. But that's a little strange.
You said something. You hinted at something about racial stereotypes, as if police have racial stereotypes of blacks, negative racial stereotypes of blacks. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. People have stereotypes on others because of certain biases we hold to them. It's not exclusive to black people. It's exclusive to anyone. We hold biases to most people and most things, but it's going to vary based on your exposure to that. Right? Mm-hmm. You could have a situation where you're around women your entire life and still say some weird sexist shit. You could be around a bunch of black people your whole life and still say some racist shit against black people. But something that you need to do, in my opinion, it's like the individual thing of it, is like analyzing, okay, what are my unconscious biases towards these individuals?
Well, I'm completely in agreement with you there. We try to do that culturally. I'm curious if you believe that police all have a negative stereotype of blacks.
I live in the suburbs. Okay. When I lived in the city, cops
so they probably don't. Okay, so they probably don't have
the suburbs. They're not out.
They're not racial profiling you there. Okay.
And to make this to really drive this point home, I'll give you a really clean example. Right. When I moved here where I am right now, I have had 2 interactions with police. Mm-hmm. In the 3 years I've been here. Right. When I was living up in the city up in North Jersey, it was an everyday occurrence.
Right.
And it was an everyday occurrence, as in like there was an officer like communicating with me in some capacity. Mm-hmm. I got pulled over multiple times on bullshit. I never got tickets, but it would just be some things where it's like, I saw you didn't stop at that stop sign. And it's like, there was no stop sign. So what's there to stop at? It's like, oh, they just added it, but I guess they removed it. And it's like, so you're saying that there's a stop sign there. This is an actual occurrence, by the way. So it's like you're saying that there's a stop sign there, but someone removed it. But I'm supposed to know that someone removed it, and that's why he stopped me. And it's like, all right, guy.
Well, I bring up the racial stereotypes because it relates to CRT. I see a lot of people are upset about CRT because it creates negative stereotypes of whites, that all whites are racist, power hungry, money hoarders.
Yeah, and if people believe that's what CRT posits, or even advocate in a way that that's what CRT posits, then they're not actually serious in trying to solve the problem at its core. Where it's like, what is the issue? Like what I've seen is that there are teachers in a lot of states that are under-equipped in talking about race to the classroom, to their class. Then what happens is, usually what you would think is what happened, is that they would get some type of guidance on how these lesson plans work, and maybe some guidance of like how you should approach this in a way that is not only age appropriate, but culturally appropriate for their students. And something's happening in that pipeline. It's either they're not getting proper communication with their superiors, whether that be administrators or otherwise. They might not even have administrators to sort of like collaborate with these type of things, or They just think like in the goodness of their heart and the goodness of their children that they're gonna do this thing that's right. And it's like, look, no, like I don't want to fucking waste time in gym class having a slavery walk. Like I can think of 30 other things I would rather be doing.
So you're against privilege walks then?
Yeah, they're fucking stupid. Like
okay.
There's no like. Let me put it this way. Like, from the majority of my life, I was the only black kid in a lot of these classes. So I'm not trying to waste time on privilege walks.
All eyes are on you during the privilege walk. They're like, oh, where's he going to go? Yeah, how like, uncomfortable is that?
Yeah, it's like, okay, today we're going to talk about hip hop. And it's like, perfect. Great. What I now become the teacher for the 6th grade class.
Yeah, so you're experiencing these negative stereotypes. Go ahead, Sitch.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, what CRT posits is that basically, since the country was founded by white men who had, who legalized slavery and had all this racism going along at the time, and all this institutionalized racism, that the foundation, the framework of our country is inexorably racist, and it cannot necessarily be fixed via, new laws or our liberal conception of values or individual rights. And that there needs to be an approach or a turn back to black nationalism and black separatism, which is that it sounds kind of like what you're advocating as well with sort of this community control.
I have no idea where you got that from, but man, oh man, send that book my way because that sounds like a really hilarious read. I like to read.
Well,
are you pro CRT? Well, like we don't even really know.
I'm against CRT. I'm against CRT as people describe it in the modern mainstream because that's not going to lead to anything. We're going to be stuck having this circle jerk conversation.
Before I tell you where it's from, do you agree with that or disagree?
It's retarded. It's a retarded thing to say. Like, why can't we?
So you don't think that's true?
Why can't we agree that this idea that black nationalism and black separatism is the way that we ought to go? Black nationalists and separatists can't even agree with each other. So, like, what are they going to do? Just
obviously they're talking
to the high guard and argue. What's that? Sorry,
they're talking very broad strokes, obviously, because you kind of have to if you're writing a paper on this, right?
I mean, if you're
this is just the introduction of the paper. Obviously, in the paper, they're going to go into more specifics, but
yeah, sure. But then if you're still going to, again, like we can to switch it all the way to nationalism and separatism, that would even go as far as like, okay, I guess you could say that like if you're trying to posit these ideas, level 1 is antagonize white people. That's not something I agree with. Like my entire family's white. Why would I adopt an ideology that antagonizes white people when it's my entire fucking family? That's like antithetical to what I advocate for with my community.
Well, you might not.
Yeah, and they're not going to. And the thing is too, like, and the funny thing is too, and this is the great part, they'll never get into power because they're not serious. Right. Because if you're actually serious about progressing in society, like you're not going to like push from this black nationalist and separatist lens. We already had multiple FBI initiatives to antagonize these groups. So like, why would like anybody like posit that idea if not to just get arrested and antagonized by the FBI? Well, unless that's the whole plan. You know?
Well, to answer your question, that what I just said, that comes from the key critical race theory book, Critical Race Theory, the key writings that formed the movement. It's literally the second page of the introduction.
Yeah, that's one book that's an encapsulation of multiple. I read that book before. I know where you're knocking at. I disagree with that sentiment. I disagree with that sentiment.
That's literally, it's in the introduction.
Yeah, and I disagree with the author that posited the argument. Like,
okay, but you can. Okay, but what you can say that you think that it's a stupid position, but you can't deny that it's not the CRT position.
Well, if the CRT position is that, and we're trying to get this shit out of schools, you're going to have to create that line for me.
You have to create what mind frame?
The line of like, okay, if we believe that it's this push of nationalist and separatist agenda, which I believe it isn't. I haven't seen that. But if somebody posits that, I'm going to be like, okay, let me take a look at it. Let me take a look at the evidence. But that book isn't in my schools. It's not in the schools that my college.
Oh, I understand what you're saying. Right. Well, let's separate before we talk about whether CRT is being taught in schools, because we're just right now. What is CRT?
Right.
And to me, what I just laid out, which is what they lay out in this CRT book, that is the core concept of CRT. And you can say that you disagree with it, but you can't disagree with that being the core concept of CRT.
You would have to trace it from the writings outside of the introduction. And then from the tracing of the writings outside of the introduction, you'd also have to show how it manifests itself in different texts. And we've done this before in other topics. Like the reason why we understood that certain communist rhetoric manifests itself in the minds of Americans is because it was overt and loud about the embracing of communism and otherwise. But when it comes to Black nationalism and Black separatism, these were things that were antagonized exclusively, and not exclusively, even the word I'm looking for is dedicated. It was a dedicated, targeted approach at weeding out Black nationalism, not only in Black communities, but in the United States broadly. It's the reason why people get really uncomfortable when you hear Nick Cannon or Louis Farrakhan or Malcolm X, because we've antagonized Black nationalism.
Well, so, Nick Cannon was saying like really racist, anti-Semitic shit. So
who?
Nick Cannon.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, cool.
It wasn't like, Black nationalism. He is sympathetic to Black nationalism, and he said it. Well, of course, yeah, but he believes in the Jacobian conspiracy theory that white people were genetically engineered to be evil thousands of years ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens when you make a little bit of money. You start saying some crazy shit from time to time, and thankfully, he's not going to have any political power for as long as I'm alive. Right. He has enough kids that he has a lot more other things to worry about than Black nationalism.
No, but I guess I just don't understand, because it seems like when it comes to discerning who is racist, or whether Tucker Carlson is dog whistling to white nationalists, it's like it's not very explicit, and it's kind of, you have to read into it. And sure. I don't understand why, when you said you don't like CRT, you're still kind of like defending this interpretation of CRT, which is very explicit.
Oh no, because my argument here is that I'm not going to have an introduction dictate on how I feel about something. The reason why I think CRT is insufficient, and specifically in K through 12 schools, is because it's something that shouldn't belong there in the first place. The only place where I think it would be appropriate to even like take a look at or even talk about would be some AP course. But that's also would require the reimagining what the AP course has to include some type of portion that will be added as college credit for an AP class. And even then, it's like, no one's going to fucking do that. No one, like, we're not changing AP history courses anytime soon to include CRT.
Well, so, I mean, I've read most of the book. I read beyond the introduction. It's just, to me, I just use the introduction because it's the clearest language that gives the point of an introduction to a book is to provide a summary of the contents of the book.
Right.
Okay,
and
so when they say that CRT explicitly embraces race consciousness, and then they explicitly define race consciousness as we need to return to ideas about Black nationalism, Black separatism, and we need to throw away the ideas of assimilation and integration and colorblindness. That seems very apparent to me what is being advocated for. And then if you read all the individual essays, all they're talking about is in that framework completely.
Sure. And then the question is for us now, is how is that manifesting itself in the thing that we're worried about? So like if we're worried about CRT in K through 12 schools, and we believe this to exist in K through 12 schools, then where is that?
I see where you're saying.
Where is that next step? Like listen, like I'm tired of people invoking dead white philosophers about their ideologies and how they exist in schools. And it's like, okay, why are we so obsessed with Socratic method in public schools? Because we understand that Socratic method is something that we can visibly see, and we see people visibly applying that in how they talk and interact with their classes. And it's a very easy line to the same. And on top of that, teachers are very overt about that, especially in history courses. And they're talking about different ideas about like observations of reality. But when it comes to critical race theory, and this is my big frustration, is that, listen, if there's some shit that's antagonizing white people, I'm on board. It's a violation of multiple amendments. It's a violation of the Civil Rights Act. But then when I ask parents, okay, what does that look like? They start getting into this weird, like, well, this is what I was told by this person. And it's like, okay, this person isn't part of your community. So why are you listening to somebody who's not part of your community saying that something exists? Like, you should be going out and trying to find that. Because if you believe it to exist, then you gotta find it.
What is your take on the concept of white privilege?
Yeah, like in America, people, to no fault of their own, created a society to maintain and control power based on what they look like. For the founding fathers, that was the fact that they were what we now know is racially identifiably white. And then instead of coming to terms and like, hey, we're creating a different hierarchy than what we were under in Great Britain and otherwise, they created a bunch of different exceptions historically. And we fought a whole ass war because of that bullshit. And then on top of that, even in the Reconstruction Amendments, which were a means of rectifying that bullshit, they still left caveats for people who still wanted that old way of doing things to still do it. So you would have things like the exception in the 13th Amendment, which has been like kind of like sort of like hammered to death by means of
But what is white privilege? I'm a little lost here.
White privilege, which for me is just the prioritization of the expectations, needs, wants, and desires of white people.
Okay.
The problem is that this isn't something that's just going to be like from a social aspect. It's something that's going to happen.
Don't white people have different needs and wants? I mean, no, a lot of white people in the election though voted for Biden, and a lot of white people voted for Trump. So I mean, those are different desires, definitely like polar opposite desires.
Sure, but it's getting a bit more complicated there, where what we want as Americans, I would argue, is pretty much the same. The way we go about it is going to be different, but we have shown through policy, and very explicitly through policy, that there are racialized outcomes that lead to non-white people not being able to have the fair shake in whether it be the free economy or in education and otherwise. Like, we still have people who are alive today who had to get bused to integrated schools. So this is in the observable memory of a lot of people. And we're beyond that point, you could argue. But then when it's like, okay, we saw the benefits of busing programs where you explicitly move people to other communities for their education.
We're talking about history here, but I mean, just present day, like the thing that always confuses me is like, you're basically making an argument for racial profiling by saying that you know, whites have one desire, which is I don't see how is much different than the racial profiling argument that I am against. I'm certain you are against for blacks and police. I mean, it's just a different type of bad racial profiling.
Well, I can give you a good example, right? Mm-hmm. What validity does a policy of hair have in a school? Mm-hmm. What is your goal of having a policy of what your hair should look like in school?
They want conformity. They don't want distraction to some extent.
Sure. What is distracting about hair?
Well, I mean, if it depends, if you have like a blue mohawk, I guess they feel like that's too distracting to other students.
Okay.
Or anti-conformity.
What should you do? I mean, what should you do with a student? What should you do with a student who has blue hair and they shouldn't have that hair in school?
You say, hey, they tell them to not do that, and if the kid keeps doing it, they tell their parents, listen, we have some kind of dress code. I mean, I guess the same thing as a dress code. They say, we have some dress code. You have to wear certain clothes in a certain way, and you have to have your hair in a certain way, and your kid's violating.
What does hair have anything to do with an education, though?
What does a dress code have?
Exactly. That's my point. Like, time again, we've seen that, like, in hair policy, like schools have felt the need that like hair is one reason that's distracting from the learning environment, and we know that in education.
That's a causal connection right there. Distracting. Obviously, when you're in a learning environment, you want the least number of distractions as possible.
Right, and it's been proven that hair has nothing in terms of distracting the learning environment. But time and time again, we have seen students who have ethnic hair, like mine, for instance, who are given these ultimatum issues and sort of rectifying that. So what that looks like is an administrator will tell a parent, hey, your child cannot come back to school until they shave their hair. I believe that a student should be able to go to school regardless of how they present themselves to the world. And obviously there's room for extremes there. You don't want students coming to school naked. You don't want students coming to school with underwear. But in this particular case, I'm saying, hey, why are you giving a shit about students' hair? They will express themselves however they want, no different than how they're going to do so outside of the four walls. So why are you choosing to harp on that?
Can't we can separate, like, I think it's stupid in schools and in employment situations where they ban certain hairstyles that would be associated with specific ethnic groups or whatever, and they say like, oh no, you have to have like white style hair, whatever we want to call it. And I agree that that's like preposterous, but that doesn't
say that. They say like things like your hair has to be a certain hair length down.
Right.
Down
what,
shoulder.
But that's different. But
Sitch,
that's different
I'm confused
than saying,
on the causal connection between my original question, though. I mean,
we can get back to that, but I just want to say, like,
okay,
you can criticize. I can see why you can criticize that stuff that's obviously targeting specific people, versus saying that there should be no policy for dress or hair whatsoever, because these are two completely different questions.
Oh, good point.
And I don't know why. What's the point of conflating them?
Right. So what's been adopted in most schools that I've seen that adopt a more freer dress code policy is that it's something along the lines of students can wear however they want. However, their dress cannot be a distraction from the learning environment. And usually a distraction from the learning environment is at the discretion of the teacher or administrator making that claim. But at the same time, a lot of the instances of distraction from the learning environment are those extremes that I described. So they'll make some language around like certain types of whether it be ripped clothes or otherwise, like ripped clothes that would reveal the buttocks, ripped clothes that would reveal the breast. Usually that's sometimes like some schools would define it like that. But
sounds very distracting.
Yeah, and look, like not every school is going to get dress code policy right, but by and large, like when it comes to the idea of like white privilege, for me being the prioritization of the expectation, needs, wants, and desires of white people, those expectation, needs, wants, and desires are things that everybody would want. Like you want to, generally speaking, be able to go into a school and be left alone on your public appearance.
I don't see how that's true, because just as many white people want blue hair and don't want blue hair as the ethnic. I mean, obviously blue hair is a signifier of something. Like there are conservative jocks and there are goth people that are diametrically opposed in hairstyles, and each of them is going to want to advocate for more people to look like them and be annoyed by the people who don't look like them. And that's two sides of a white coin there. So I mean, I'm
losing you. Are you saying that like we ought to have these things so that these ideas don't perpetuate?
No, I'm saying I'm going back to the racial profiling thing. I'm trying to understand how this white privilege thing is just not another type of terrible racial profiling that we're adopting when we've been working for the last 60 years to get rid of the type of racial profiling that you've admitted is bad for blacks and you had to deal with when you lived in a city where you were getting stopped by cops three times a day.
I see what you're saying.
Like, so if we change the environment so that whites are constantly getting racially profiled in the same way that blacks are getting racially profiled in the inner city, and whites have an electoral advantage over blacks, that doesn't seem like a future that is going to be promising for any of us that want to live in like a peaceful, multicultural society.
Well, I think I see where you might be getting missing what I'm saying here. So maybe I can like point that in a different way, right?
Okay.
So like in communities in the United States, these expectations, needs, wants, and desires that I'm describing, they're not racially exclusive. It's not just because it's not white people who just want these things. This is why I said prioritization. I'm not saying that like these are things that white people want, therefore other people want that. That's nonsense. Like what I'm saying here is that because of how things were constructed in the United States, it led to these outcomes. So you're going to have weird statistics on crime because in a lot of these areas where who you live around is going to dictate your crime results. When I say your crime results, like the outcomes of arrests, the outcomes of people getting shot, the outcomes of different types of crimes, like that's just going to be a racialized outcome based on the community that you're in. So communities that have large black populations are going to see black on black crime higher than majority white populations. That's just going to be true. My issue here, my concern is that when we're looking at certain policies, we don't want situations where white people, to no benefit of their own, are benefited. And different communities handle this in different ways. Like if we're going to say, hey, we should try to make an effort to learn each other's names, by and large in America, white people don't have to worry about that problem. White people, by and large, don't have to worry about people pronouncing their name correctly. Unless you come from an ethnic minority country like Norway or something like that, you might run into some difficulty. But by and large, for most Americans, their names are easy to pronounce. And how does that manifest itself when you're in a school environment? It manifests itself in a school environment when a teacher makes a nickname for you that's not something that you aspire to be. So, like, if my name is Nyambi and my teacher calls me Nimbi, that's not my name. Just say my name correctly. No different than you do all the other names in the classroom. Because, like, when you have those examples, and this is true, and again, like, prioritization doesn't mean it's always going to happen where white people don't have to worry about this problem. You're going to get Bjorns who get Bjorn every time a teacher goes up to there on that. That's not okay when it happens to white people, and it's not okay when it happens to black people.
Can we,
by and large,
can we pause for a second here? Sure. I mean, sometimes these things devolve into kind of a debate type environment. Like, obviously, we're not trying to gotcha you or anything like that. No. So, but I want to offer, because I see this in the comments of our streams. You've been nice enough to come on. You're sharing your thoughts with us. If you'd like to bring in a friend.
Me?
I don't want you to feel like we're two on one of you, but
man. Like,
I have one more question, and then I'll turn it over to Sitch.
Go
ahead.
I guess like to clear the air there is that, look, like, I didn't come on here to try to like debate or try to like posit like we're gonna walk out of these things totally reformed and we're gonna be reprogrammed. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, we're gonna walk out of this agreeing on some things. We're gonna walk out of this disagreeing on some other shit. Like, there's people in your chat who probably think I'm some crazy black nationalist.
I know. I didn't know, because all I saw was the clip on Twitter, right? So I don't know. You could be totally down with CRT. I did listen to a talk that you had with Vosh relatively recently. Maybe it was yesterday, maybe it was the day before.
Like a week ago, yeah.
Yeah, it gave me hope. I mean, you actually seemed like you were approaching Vosh to talk to him about how his conversations might be more productive if he tried a little harder to make them more productive, which I thought was an interesting take.
Tricky.
Yeah.
Like, and I'll give you like a kind of like my experience with it, right? Where it's like, I came into talking online with the desire to expose people to just like questioning the world around them and just like kind of stop treating things just to be normal, right? Like, Donald Trump was the president of the United States. If you told me that in like 95, I would just laugh at you. It's like, what? Like, but we hit that point in human history where a celebrity with a lot of wealth made it to the White House. And that's kind of cool in a lot of different ways. But that being said, like, something that gets kind of exposed online a lot is this idea that like everybody is like diametrically opposed in a conversation. There has to be an enemy, there has to be a villain, and then like your person that you're favored for is probably going to be the person that like you're watching explicitly, you know what I'm saying? So it's like your community is going to side with whatever you guys say no matter what. I am not streaming this right now, so like I have no community to be like, well, actually, but I do that, and I don't stream these things anymore, especially deeper conversations, because I want my community to be exposed to spaces outside of their comfort zone. That's the only way we're going to move forward a lot. With that being said, right, you might run into some crazy stuff. Like, I don't know if you know Hack from the Hack Report. He's a cool guy with some cool perspectives on some things. Would I ever have him on? I don't know. But at the same time, like, if you're not exposed to that, like, that might come like out of like blue, like, does somebody thinks like that? It's like, no, like, I watch his content, I know how he talks and how he navigates. I think for most people, like, my desire is to try to reach out to people when I can, while I have the capacity to do so.
Well, our chat regularly calls us liberals, socialists. Vosh calls us conservatives, which it's funny. Like, we basically I would classify myself as kind of a disaffected liberal, but that people have a completely different take of us on the left because I think we're constantly being mischaracterized. So, but I want to ask one thing, and then I'll turn it over to Sitch, and I'll let Sitch take over, so we don't have like the 2-on-1.
I'll also try to make my answers a little bit shorter.
Yeah, that would be great. So so when you were having this conversation with Vosh, you were talking about Jesse Lee Peterson, and you said something about the extrapolation of conservative ideology means that black people do not exist. Now, that might be a paraphrase. I didn't pause the video and quote you exactly. But do you? This is a strange thing to me because I think a lot of the problem is, and especially in Vosh's community, because Vosh mischaracterizes the motivations of conservatives like all the time, and I think it drives people crazy. But I understand the political value of it, to have a bunch of people that basically see these people as the enemy, evil, will do terrible things, or liars, or just mean racist people. So, but I'm curious about your what exactly you meant by that, and what you consider conservative ideology to mean, and why conservative ideology leads to the non-existence of black people.
Yeah, well, the thing is that the best way I can describe it is that Democrats and Republicans, and I'm talking specifically in America, right? Mm-hmm. Is that they're both capitalists. They hide it in different ways. Mm-hmm. Democrats have done a very good job at kind of reminding you through their actions that they're capitalist, where conservatives kind of do it in a more like hush hush way, right? Where it's like it's very clear. Like for an example, right? Like Marjorie Taylor Greene is clearly rich, and she kind of like hides this idea that she is because it optically looks good for her. But my point is that Democrats and Republicans are capitalists in different ways. Now, what makes them different from each other is the tenets of their electorate and what their electorates look like. For example, on the right, the right wing, the conservative right wing in America has a large base of evangelical Christian women. And that's a very powerful base in their electorate. And if they're looking to be more inclusive and to expand their electorate, they would have to identify, okay, not every person in America is an evangelical Christian woman. So we're going to have to appease certain bases in a way that is consistent with the rest of the tent that we create for ourselves.
But isn't there huge evangelical black churches? I feel like there are, which would probably be more conservative.
Not ones that are for Christianity, not at all. Mm-hmm. It's more Baptist and Protestant. And that's where that disagreement lies, where it's like, okay, if you are not part of this electorate that I'm describing here, like where else do you go?
Mm-hmm. But you see capitalism as a tenet of conservative ideology.
No, both sides are capitalists in different ways. Yeah.
Was that the main is that the main primary thing that you're viewing this from, is like capitalist versus anti-capitalist?
No, I just for me it's just that both of these bases have electorates that they're going to pander towards and tickle each other's clits to. And then my question is like, okay, which base do I want to side myself in? Right? Democrats, by and large, have been very, very adamant about gun legislation. But meanwhile, you're still getting people are still getting blasted in these Democrat cities. So it's like, okay, if you're against guns, you don't want to attack the criminality of guns, then you can go fuck yourself on that. Then you look at conservatives, where it's like, okay, yeah, guns are fucking awesome, and we're going to protect them at all costs. So, for me, I'm in the camp of all costs. What does that look like?
So is that I'm not particularly. I mean, I consider conservatism as just, focus on what is working. They're very cautious about changing political policy. So if you want to say guns are a problem and guns are going to make black people extinct, I don't know the causal connection there. So that's why I'm just like, what is you said this thing, which I know is just making, conservatives are seeing this and going, that's such a grave mischaracterization of our position. I do agree that there are racists that you could categorize as conservative, but categorizing conservatives as racist or people that
Correct.
want to see blacks no longer a part of America, I think is a way different thing to say, and completely wrong. It's the characterization of all leftists as pedophiles is about the same kind of like terrible hyperbolic claim. Obviously people on the right make that claim, but it's so incorrect that it baffles the mind. So, but you made that statement to Vosh, and I'm just curious.
I see where we have lost in translation there. So, like, my whole thing is that there's certain aspects of conservative ideology that let me pull back like 10 steps, and I'll try to very brief as I can like get to it, right? Where the remnants of truly white nationalist, white separatist, and white supremacist groups are going to need to side themselves with some part of the electorate. Because they need to perpetuate political power. But the problem is, time and time again that we've seen, and this is what frustrates me about conservatives, is that they will go as far to say, and it's gonna, and let me clarify this very, very clearly, is it's going to depend on the electorate that you talk to. Like the electorate group for it. For example, we know that within the right, police are nurtured and protected. And that's great. They're more than welcome to do that. But my concern is always like when you have
until they beat up truckers in Canada.
What's that?
Until they beat up truckers in Canada.
Like you have situations where like the white supremacist groups, the ones that we like, the buzz ones that people think of when they think of white supremacists, they found their ways within these conservative electorates, and they essentially have been hiding their power level since the 80s because they know they can't express themselves in the same way. But what happens is you get like remnants of them still existing, where like you'll have a portion of them cheering a little too hard when Donald Trump talks about certain things, and some politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene have to like run away from that in their career, or even Lauren Witzke. And that's my concern, where like if conservatives are looking to push in whatever you believe to be sort of like quote unquote anti-racist, you're going to have to not only call out those individuals who have nothing to do with your electorate, but also be very overt in what you advocate for in terms of policy. But unfortunately for conservatives, this is going to vary based on the electorate that you're navigating around, where there's still a level of compassion for these people that exists within certain advocacy of the electorate. Like say, for example, evangelical Christians, where they'll argue certain things of like, yeah, these are children of God, therefore like they should be allowed to repent for their sins. And then you have a lot of black people who are like, I'm sorry, what? And it's like I don't know if I would feel very comfortable being a member of this electorate when like you say stuff like that. That's a quote from a woman in Louisiana. I forget her name. She was a member of the House of Reps. If I remember it off the top of my head, I'll send it to you, Adam. If I remember like after, but it was like a wild statement for a conservative to say.
Well, we're still drifting off, and I'm curious specifically in the conservative ideology. Like if you came on and said, listen, I'm making a case that conservative ideology is based in ethnocentrism, like that's something I could say, okay, I see the causal connection here. If you came in and I thought this was kind of the route that you were going, you were saying, listen, white nationalists are infiltrating the conservative party, and they're basically going to take over the ideology and supplant it with their ideology, similar to what we see going on with critical race theory on the left, with the Marxists trying to subvert the normal, mainstream liberal perspective on race and the civil rights. Then I would understand that argument. But I don't understand how anyone can say like conservative ideology means that black people do not exist. There are tons of black people who are conservatives.
Yeah, I'm saying within within the electorate and the advocacy that Jesse Lee Peterson talks about and advocates for. For instance, like he is against to varying degrees based on how you get him there, but the idea that we ought to integrate within society. and that integration is a good thing for Black people.
But you said integration was a good thing. You said you were against
but he
separatism.
says it's not. He overtly
Jesse Lee Peterson is against integration.
Yes,
I don't think that's true.
But he won't say it in the same way that you might hear somebody like a more like farther left leaning individual say.
Jesse Lee Peterson came up with something called White History Month. That is the whole month of July. It's hard for me to imagine.
Wait, what is Jesse Lee Peterson? Because I always perceived him like, I don't even think he's a conservative. I thought he was a neo-reactionary type.
Jesse,
he's much
are we talking
more
about
fringe on the right.
Jesse Lee Peterson?
No.
We're talking
the guy
about,
who talks about that blacks are in a fallen state.
Have you forgiven your father, Jesse Lee Peterson? We're talking about the same guy here, right?
Yeah.
I thought he was much further than right than conservative.
No, he's nowhere near neo-reactionary. Are you kidding me?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, wait, you said
like it depends on like
you said he's anti-integration. What
he's not anti-integration. That's
what is.
Do not
say he's not gonna say it. Referencing. Yeah, he's not gonna say it in the same way that somebody like farther.
So you're saying he's hiding his power level? Then that's basically
he'll say things like Black people are in a fallen state. And we ought to like rise up from this fallen state.
But he's saying that they should rise up because they should embrace conservative values like marriage.
Yeah. But the thing is like I know where that comes from him. Like I
listen,
hear that, I know that.
If he's saying
wait, Adam, stop. Hold on. I don't understand what Joe's argument is, because if he's saying that blacks are in a fallen state and they need to embrace, quote unquote, white institutions, if he's casting marriage as a white institution, which I think is wrong to do, but if he's doing that, that seems to be not anti-integration. That seems to be very assimilative, what he's advocating for.
Yeah, like his whole spiel is from what I'm hearing his language. And again, like to be clear, it's unfortunate that you can't get him to extrapolate on these ideas because a lot of his conversations are interview based, where like he won't go as far as saying that like Black people need to live amongst themselves and push up for themselves. But he'll say that Black people need to live their lives and just don't worry about white people. Like they're going to take care of their own things. And then based on that language, depending on the portion of the conservative electorate that hears that sentiment, they might respond in a way that's not what Jesse's advocating for at all.
So this completely depends on some sort of miscommunication for it to happen. That's not really.
Well, it's not really a miscommunication. It's based on what a group of an electorate hears a sentiment. They're going to respond in a way.
Right. But it is ultimately a miscommunication if Jesse Lee Peterson intends one thing and the electorate takes it completely differently, and that somehow ends up in the non-existence of Black people. And just Jesse Lee Peterson, if Jesse Lee Peterson is advocating for Blacks to embrace conservative values like the nuclear family and having kids and getting good jobs and stuff like that, how does that end up in the Black people not existing? I think it would actually end up in more Black people existing and thriving.
Well, it depends on what you mean by existing and thriving. Where if we understand that, hey, two parents lead to better results, and a certain electorate wants to make it very clear what those two parents are or who those two parents are, then you're going to have contradictions in the advocacy, where I'm all for the expansion of families in the United States. It's very clear we're beyond the point where we can push towards moving back towards a nuclear family. So we just kind of have to acknowledge that, hey, single parent homes exist, different sort of like communal family structures exist, the traditional nuclear family exists, and we ought to assist these families in ways that their needs are met for the sake of their children and themselves. But based on who you talk to, you're going to come with disagreements on that. You're going to have some people who say like, no, we ought not to do that. Like,
in the context of this conversation, though, it sounds like you agree that two-parent families are better than one-parent families, regardless of whether or not you got two moms, two dads, or a mom and a dad. I mean, I would definitely agree with that. But even if the conservatives say no to single-parent families, right? that still doesn't end up in the non-existence of black people in any way, shape, or form, because it doesn't.
Well, I think what Adam is trying to get at is kind of like, I don't know if you saw this a while ago. There was a chart that the National African American History Museum put up. That was
I
from
remember the chart.
Judith Cates's chart, and it had like white culture, and it lists a bunch of things that I would consider super racist to just attach to white culture. And it seems like is that what you're alluding to, Adam, when you say like? I guess he's asking.
Well,
like,
no, I'm trying to get.
Yeah, I'm trying to like to be clear.
I'm trying to get to how.
Yeah.
Do you believe that conservative ideology is at its heart racist? I guess that's what I'm asking, because that's the implication of the statement.
I like guns. Fuck that.
Well, I don't
like
know
guns,
what that means.
Religion
but...
is. I like let me like. I have conservative values.
Okay, so you have conservative values. Okay,
yeah, and I think everybody does,
right,
to an extent. Like, I think the problem is people are kind of too chicken shit to admit it, and then they want to be like cordial in their left leading groups and not cause arguments. Where it's like, look, guns are fucking awesome. Maybe there's something else going on to the reason why kids are getting blasted in schools. Religion and religious expression should be something that's protected in the United States. I think if you are religious and like abolishing religion is going, you're going to like basically it's going to be cultural erasure, depending on how you look at it, and that's not something we would want as Americans, because we literally fought wars against that.
Well,
like,
there's a bit of a like conflation of conservative ideology to the goals of the Republican Party, which I don't think is like a one-to-one thing. So,
well, I think we're in a reimagining stage personally, where I think for the longest time there was this idea, even when I was growing up, there's this idea of like, you know, like kind of live amongst, when I say live amongst yourself, I mean live amongst yourselves in terms of limited government. And if the government intervenes, there better be a good goddamn reason. We should probably, to the best of our ability, not get into continual wars with countries. Like, kind of like, these were kind of things that I grew up to understanding what conservatism is. Taxes suck. Like, sort of like
but
basics.
Don't we all agree that taxes suck? I mean,
well, I mean, it's you'd be surprised at how people argue that, where it's like, okay. And I think what happened with Donald Trump is that there was a shift or desire to shift in certain aspects of the conservative electorate. Like, again, like I think that the one that conservatives should like try to preserve to the best of their ability is evangelical Christian women. And I'm like willing to, someone like I would consider myself on the left, I'm willing to admit to that and go to sleep knowing that that's one of their strongest electorates. It's like whatever. It's whatever to me. It's like they got to cater to that group of people somehow. But I do think that their perspectives on abortion are kind of rough, and I don't agree with that. So when I'm looking into certain policies, like I understand, like if
I hate to interrupt you here, but you keep presenting policies that would do the opposite of end up in black non-existence. I mean, if they're against abortion, then obviously there would be more babies born. So
right, so I gotcha. So I guess if I'm understanding this correctly, because I think I now see the. I'm so sorry, man. I'm so sorry. I see the disconnect. Yeah. Can I articulate the disconnect if that's all right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think it sounds like your difficulty that you're having is the claim that the extrapolation of or the expansion of conservative policy would lead to black people, in this case, no longer existing, which was my quote from.
Right. Yes.
Gotcha. I see. I'm so sorry. I see where.
I can see it. I can see it from a political perspective because, you know, obviously both political parties want to minimize the voting base of the opposite party, but it has nothing to do with ideology or conservative ideology or liberal ideology or so I mean we've kind of belabored this.
I see the disconnect. Yeah. Because something that I guess I didn't, if I said so, I'm sorry. If I didn't, I'm sorry. Maybe got lost in there. Like when I say the terms of existence, I'm talking more towards the push for political power for black individuals in this case, where if I believe that Jesse Lee Peterson is very keen on maintaining what currently exists, and then sort of self-empowerment within that, that's a totally fine thing to have. But that's not going to include running for political office. Or that's not going to include, when I say running for political office, I'm talking like higher than local government. So like federal presidency, stuff like that. It's going to essentially be navigating and evolving based on what the present situation pins you in. And to an extent of that, to be clear, I agree with Jesse Lee Peterson there to a extent. Like, I live in Jersey. I could vote for a turtle and it's not going to matter. like, and that creates a substantive problem.
Yeah, where gerrymandering is a giant problem.
Yeah, like if I believe that I live in a state where it doesn't matter who I vote for, and conservatives are not competitive outside of local government, then what is a conservative supposed to do in my state? Like, it's unfortunate. And then on top of that, if you look at the composition of conservatives versus Democrats, just at the local political level, so the state assembly, but that being the state reps and the Senate, it's more conservative than it really represents itself to be. But then at the federal level, it's controlled by Democrats. So if you are a right-leaning individual in Jersey, you're fucked. There's nothing you can do. Like, it doesn't matter who votes for you, how many people you vote for you're going to get bent over by Democrats. And that's not fair.
I like to separate the political conversation from the ideology conversation, because it's so important to do that. The Sitch, I lied. I have one more thing I want to ask, but I mean, it might. I'll let you take over because you haven't said anything.
Well,
for a
I
long
mean,
time.
there were two things that I wanted to address. That was there were examples of what are the examples of things that people don't like in school, and then also to go back to the very first thing you were talking about in terms of kind of like the separatism attitude, because I think we have to talk about where morality comes from and why I think that necessarily won't work. But having the specific examples that's happening in schools, because you were saying that, where is the, you can have problems with critical race theory theoretically in the ideology, but where does it manifest in the schools? Yeah. And I would say it manifests in the schools, and I thought this was what Adam was alluding to, which is when there's teaching about white privilege, but more specifically when there's teaching about whiteness as being like a bad thing, and sort of castigating like white supremacy and all these bad things under this label as whiteness just seems so incredibly toxic.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems with that, right? Where I'm gonna try my best to be like as direct as I can.
Okay.
I'm trying so hard. Yeah, I'm recovering from a cold too, so things are kind of scattered.
Okay. Yes.
So the thing that I've noticed to be true, I mentioned this I think in the beginning, is that there are teachers having these really poor conversations about race and what it looks like. And then what happens is, if you're a student in those situations, I would argue you ought to push back on these ideas. Like, school is this environment where you're supposed to push back on ideas, move into ideas deeper. But there are a lot of teachers where it's their sort of first exposure to talking about these things outside of like the theoretical, where it's like, you can read all you want about Marx. That doesn't mean you can talk about like Marxism, And then what happens is you'll get these antagonistic lesson plans, antagonistic rhetoric on the pushback of those ideas. So sometimes you'll have a teacher just kind of outburst where it's like, well, you don't understand this thing because you're white. And it's like, hang on. That's not going to bring in your white student in on certain concepts about like societal prioritization. Like, you're not going to reach anybody if that's how you antagonize them,
Well, I mean, I agree that obviously that's a bad way to teach, but I don't see it as just bad teaching. I see it as the principles that are being put forward are bad principles. And maybe if we're using CRT, that's too narrow. Maybe if we broaden it to like, when I look at general, what we consider wokeness in terms of how, the race conversation has changed drastically over the last 6 years, away from kind of, universal liberal principles to what I would classify more like a neo-Marxian conflict theory framework. And to me, that's the problem. I see these things as inherently divisive, and there's no way, even in the best of teaching, maybe you could sugarcoat it, you can say it the best way, but the principles themselves are going to breed resentment, are going to breed division between kids.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. Where I think that very broad, and then obviously we'll find the point where we disagree on. Where I think that
we don't have to disagree. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, my point is that because I do think there is a part that you might disagree upon, is that I think one of the issues, and maybe I just said it before, where it's that I don't want teacher, and this is like a big fucking problem that really frustrates me, is that teachers are tasked to teach what they're told with not a lot of expansion elsewhere. And we're not really in a country that embraces this expansion of what you're tasked to learn, what you're tasked to teach. So sometimes if you are a teacher that teaches history in this particular way, and then finally you have some prompt of like, hey, we're going to talk about white privilege in class today, and you should talk to your kids about white privilege. And it's like, I've only looked at history in this way, and now you want me to do it in a different way. And I think there needs to be a much more, and this is like a societal thing, where I think that there needs to be a better embracing of educating yourself as an educational professional within your own expertise. So like not just stopping at what you're tasked to teach in history, like always reading and always trying to understand more, because you never, and also paying attention to the educational climate around you so that you understand that, okay, if I have to understand what CRT is, I better be reading up as much as I can, especially for the history professors and social science professors or teachers, excuse me.
Well, I mean, should they even be talking about any of this stuff? You can talk about history without advocating for a white privilege lens on it.
Oh yeah, no, it's not even a matter of advocating for it. It's just being able to, and this is the one thing that Democrats really fucked up, because there was never once a conversation of your students are going to maybe talk to you about this, and don't turn it into some fucking lesson, but have a decent answer that's an encapsulation of what it is. And so many teachers didn't do that, but they'll make the argument of, well, what's happening is this, and that, and it has nothing to do with this. And then they kind of like wipe their hands and move on. It's like, no, that's not a good enough answer, at least in my book, where it's like, if you are in positions, and again, this is specifically towards social studies and history teachers, where you might run into having to at least touch on explaining, like, we're not talking about this, but this is what this is, if somebody brings it up, and then just move on with it. Because I don't think CRT should be in K through 12, obviously. But at the same time, like, you never know, like, what's going to come up in a classroom. And if you get enough people misrepresenting a thing, then it's going to lead into these weird like things that, like, the parents might argue for something that has nothing to do with CRT, but it's because their teacher gave them that information, that type of shit. And I think that, like, it's not even counter messaging, it's just like breeding shit. Like, and that's, I think, is a failure to educators and a failure of administration to really like this is what parents are worried about, and this is what parents are concerned about. Well, so like if we sorry, go for it.
Well, for like example, in the video that we were watching, this teacher was fired under one of these anti-CRT laws in Tennessee, I believe. And he was fired. What started this is why he was fired, but what started the complaints against him was that he was talking about the Jacob Blake shooting and the Kyle Rittenhouse situation. And he has a current events class. And he was talking about both of these incidents in the frame of white privilege. And to me, I don't know what your opinion on either of those situations are, but to me, with Jacob Blake, I don't see how white privilege has anything to do with the situation whatsoever. Unless
it's not his purview to make that assumption. And
the teacher,
it's not.
It's not his purview?
No, it's out of his wheel well. He's a current events teacher. He has no business talking about white privilege.
So you agree he shouldn't be framing these things in that way?
No, you frame it as the current events. You can have the conversation where maybe a student would make that argument and say, okay, well, let's explore that idea. Like, let's explore what that might look like. And then that's where your job happens. Your job doesn't happen based on, it's almost like it's kind of creating the work for them, where instead of like saying like, hey, some are arguing or some are discussing this idea that it is of white, like there is white privilege that plays within these shootings and the way that media portrays these individuals. That's a decent argument, decent discussion that you can have in a classroom setting, but to center that as the idea is something I'm not with that. But again, like this is something that he should have ran by somebody where it's like, hey, I'm looking to talk about Kyle Rittenhouse and Jacob Blake. I understand that there is a new piece of legislation in place. I want to know what I'm able to and not able to talk about. And then an administrator will be like, yeah, don't do that. Bring it up.
Unfortunately, the administrator is not going to have time or care enough to be like, let me explain to you, or even be smart enough to be like, let me explain to you exactly how you should have the conversation.
Yeah.
I think we kind of need a broader culture that's more in line with what I thought what you were suggesting, which is, if you have a teacher and they're talking about Kyle Rittenhouse or Jacob Blake, you have the teachers just almost like moderating the conversation. They're like, this is the facts of the case. And then if kids kind of want to discuss it in the way that they discuss it, then you can maybe, you moderate that conversation.
Exactly.
But the teacher shouldn't be saying like, this is the way to view it.
Yeah. And I'm with you on that. Like the teacher's job in these type of things is to facilitate, at least in my opinion, obviously people might have a difference here.
Right. Sure.
Is that like facilitate discussion while making sure that the things that make up who you are and your opinion on these things have little to nothing to do with the discussion. Because once you like put a little bit of yourself in these things, it can be very easy to fall into those sort of traps where it's like a student might say something really dicey about the situation, but it's not your job as a teacher to take a moral stance on it. Your job as a teacher is to say like, hey, even I might disagree with that, but how does everybody else feel? And even saying that like I might disagree with that for me is too far. It's like you want to make sure that you're facilitating the conversations so that you have perspectives represented without those perspectives ever feeling like they're antagonized. Right. And that is a hard job to do as a teacher in a moderator, something like that. And that's what you get paid to do. You get paid to watch, like, especially in a history class, you get paid to watch your students argue about the white privilege in Kyle Rittenhouse. But you should never insert that, like something that you could ask in a setting like that. It's like, okay, well, what do we mean by white privilege in this context? Like, what is this really looking like? Like, I understand, like, we were saying the term, but, and this might be just something that Adam was kind of pushing back on me on. It's like, okay, let's define the thing as we're observing it right now, and then use that and make sure we remember that when people talk about certain things. Like, and that's hard as a teacher. So it's like, I don't know.
Okay.
I wouldn't do that personally. Like, if I don't get feedback from an administrator, I'm not touching it because I've seen the consequences.
Right. Well, I mean, that's good. I mean, I agree with that completely. In that, when it comes to these, especially with current event stuff, teachers shouldn't be, should be facilitating conversations as opposed to
and it's
telling kids what to think. And then when it comes to other subjects, it seems like a lot of the culture war stuff should just be completely removed from, like, 99% of school subjects have nothing to do with any of that stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of why, for me, the conversations about race and how it manifests itself in schools, most of the time, that's up to history and social studies teachers and those curriculums to kind of like tackle that. Like, for example, we know that the education of the history, I should say, of other racialized groups is very insufficient. So it's going to be up to those programs to or departments, I should say, to like look into that and figure, okay, how do we teach the history of America in a way that's it's a bit more diverse than we're currently presenting it. But at the same time, there's like a bunch of questions of that. Like, okay, how much time do we dedicate to this? How much energy do we dedicate to that? But that's something that they got to do. And within that, I think parents should totally be in the table as well. Of like, okay, like this is our opinion on it because parents' opinions matter because they're the niggas paying taxes. So it's like how do we explore these things? And how do we have it so that it is for certain goals? But certain fields like math, you're good. Like there's different problems in mathematics. Like some of you might argue are racial, some might argue are not. But like there's no like what are you gonna talk about Marxism in fucking math class, especially in like the early levels? That's why it's always funny when people bring up that like math racism document.
Yeah. And
it's like, like I know for a fact none of my friends who are math teachers are reading a cent of that shit. Like they're not. They're just not. And I get like there is concern of that. Like there is concern about these things manifesting in schools. But to me, it's just like pick and choose your battles. Like, but it also requires for parents to pay attention. So you can't just kind of like sit on your laurels and think that the school is going to do best by your kids. Like we've seen the consequences of that with school shootings, where it's like there are gaps and problems in schools that need to be addressed. And if nobody is there to talk about it or bring it up, you're going to see poor consequences. School shootings is a poor example, but
right. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
But so do you think that the left should just cede the argument on these anti-CRT bills? Because generally when you read them, they don't mention CRT. They're just very basic anti-racism things that they're advocating for, and just say, listen, that's all fine. Let's talk about, more important issues, as opposed to using this as like a political wedge issue to just say Republicans racist, Republicans bad.
So here's what I observed. Because funnily enough, I went to this is going to sound like kind of wild to say, and thinking back to it, the anti-CRT education session. It was run by Scott Mineo from Parents Against Critical Theory. And James Lindsay was there. Asra Nomani was there. A couple other individuals. The one dude from Breitbart, and their Daily Wire, whose name escapes me. This was down in Leesburg in Virginia. And something that I found very interesting also Patty Menders was there, which is a really weird thing to kind of get blown, like kind of weird blowback, because she's like been featured in other places. She was even in what's it called, John Oliver's thing, which was really weird to see. Like, oh, I met that woman. She's from Jersey too, oddly enough. So the thing that was kind of confusing to me is that within these bills, the things that they're looking to restrict or prohibit are kind of zero argument things. And I understand parents, let me phrase this. I understand
What's a zero. Yeah, I don't know what a zero argument thing.
Yeah, I understand the left's concern that like it's going to cause a chilling effect in terms of current events and stuff like that. I agree with that. But that's a battle that you can fight better at the district level already than the federal level. So I think for Democrats moving forward, you're going to there's just concede that like these are things that Republicans are going to pass and move to teacher-student transparency. I think that's where the fight always was. I think the first group of, and this is kind of fucked because I don't think that these are viable things to argue for Democrats or Republicans. I think they got to keep that up to the local municipalities. So like, I think that's totally fine for members of like school boards running for those positions to argue about getting CRT out of schools and making sure of that. Superintendent, well, they don't get, that's a totally different thing. But like, I think there it's fine to argue these things like CRT, trans rights and stuff like that. And then just keeping a tab at the federal level. But I think like positioning your platform to create policy or advocate for policy against CRT is just a losing battle. It's like people care right now about taxes, gas prices, and how like essentially the war in Ukraine. And as much as we want to like, and it sucks, but that's kind of how the wheel works. Like if I see a Republican saying they're gonna like do shit to CRT, I'm like, okay, you're actually not serious. But like it was like that was just for me. That's just a snapshot. Like Glenn Youngkin winning in Virginia and all these bills passing of anti-CRT. That's just a snapshot of like just a accumulation of things in time. And the Republicans are going to get their wins where they can. If there's holes in school district policy, they're going to legislate it at the local level. There's nothing you can do about that.
Well, I mean, is there anything in, because all these anti-CRT, not all, most of the anti-CRT bills are basically written by Christopher Rufo's think tank, which name escapes me at the moment. So they all use like almost word for word the same
they cheat on their
language. Yeah, they all just copy the same language.
Yeah.
But when I read the language, it doesn't, there's nothing in there that jumps out at me like, this is a bad thing. This is going to lead to bad outcomes.
Now, the only thing that I think they are going to have to probably better define is the stuff around current events. I think that there is something to say, like, for example, like if I forget which bill introduced it, but it was the idea about how you ought not to talk about current events unless they're coming from some level of both siding of it.
That was a Texas bill.
Yeah. And I'm a little concerned there because obviously, as we've seen with the situation in Ukraine, there's a very fixed perspective on who you should be for and against. And when you open up teachers to the idea of like, if you do talk about it, then you're going to have to look at it in multiple perspectives. That just seems a little dicey, like in practice. For example, like isolated things like the Will Smith slap, whatever, like have two sides of it, whatever, however you want. But if you have something like say what's going on in Myanmar, then I think things are going to get a little weird where you're going to have to like really articulate what that means in legislation and practice. That's why I think if Republicans really want the win, like if they really want to like really take a slam dunk, they would have something where they're collaborating with districts within their legislation about the best way forward. That's where I think those things become unblockable because Democrats wouldn't be able to challenge that because it's like, okay, we are ceding that these districts need to create their own policies. So we're going to make a committee or make some type of like overseeing body that collaborates with the state and the districts and the Department of Education so that they can have the best path forward with guidance. That way, you're not going to have situations like we happened with that one individual who got like banned for current events where it's like, you know, this is what the bill stated. These were the guidelines based on the legislation. And they still did this anyway. That way, and you know, like Democrats wouldn't be able to fight that because they fucking did it for January 6th. So they got to hold that.
Well, I mean, it's not, I mean, I agree that they should be working together to figure out something better. It's just that's not anyone's incentive because the Republicans want to label the Democrats as groomers and the Democrats want to label the Republicans as racist. And so they're not going to come
Isn't that the
together.
weirdest dichotomy too? Where it's like,
no, I mean, it makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's just funny when you like if we were to pull, because I think like all three of us are fairly politically active and like in different ways, right? But sometimes like I feel myself wanting to pull out and just look at it and going like, the what? Like it's like one side says you're racist, well the other side are pedophiles. It's like, hang on. What the fuck did you just say? Like,
well, they have to. The racist label is so toxic in America that the Republicans they're scrambling to find the counter label because they've kind of overused the Marxist label too much. They cried wolf on that for too long. Yeah, they can't really use that anymore. So now they've gone to the groomer label, which kind of implies pedophilia, but not necessarily.
Yeah, I said pedophilia. I meant to say it's the word. That's the
right, but
magic
that's
of it, right?
intentional.
That's the magic of it, right? Like the conflation of the two.
Yeah.
And in reality, it's like, I mean, if I'm Matt Gaetz, I'm like, I hope they don't fucking find me yet. But yo, can we talk about how that man has found a way to dodge every bullet? like every time I see Madison Cawthorn in the news, I'm like, damn, Matt Gaetz is so fucking lucky.
Yeah, I didn't follow Matt Gaetz stuff too much because it got too weird where he was like saying he was being blackmailed for bail money.
For kidnapping money.
for some, and I just like,
it's
okay, this
something
is too
weird.
weird. I don't know what's happening here.
Should I move
Yeah,
on to my last question?
But
Yeah.
well, no, I was just gonna say, like, in terms of teaching both sides of things. I mean, I think you can teach both sides of
You said
contemporary.
You said both sides again.
What do you mean?
Both sides.
Yeah, I think you can teach both sides of contemporary issues. I mean, as we've had many excruciating debates on this channel about the Ukraine-Russian situation.
Oh, I know. It's just both sides is like a buzzword now.
Yeah,
I know.
I know. The way that like you would have to do it is making sure that here it goes. Alternative perspectives would be like a word that might appease certain individuals. Because
you could say what Russia's at least stated perspective. Maybe kids can argue about whether it's really true or not. What Russia's stated perspective is on.
And then, or even the question of like, okay, are we looking the same way and this is going to be a hot take, if we're looking at Vladimir Putin objectively, then we also should look at Zelensky objectively.
Right.
No.
And that is something that for some people that's just like, are you in support of Russia? It's like, no, that's not what I said. I'm just saying if we're looking at one leader objectively, we should probably look at the other leader objectively.
We don't have the means to do that, though.
No. Listen, Zelensky is a hero and a saint, and I'm pretty sure that the tears of a crying Jesus created an egg 2,000 years ago attached into Zelensky, who now is saving Ukraine from Russia.
We have very little information to go. Part of the problem that I have is people making these crazy declarations on no information. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah, right. Or very tenuous, like very loose information.
Let's not get derailed. If you want, if Joe wants to come back and talk about Ukraine, we can do that at a future date.
I assume there wouldn't be much disagreement.
I'm catching up with Ukrainian history and like the history of Russia. I'm still in the 90s in terms of news stories.
We've debated it intensely for like a month. So Sitch, I don't want to cut you off if there's anything left you want to ask. We've been going almost an hour and a half. So
I know it's just the thing about morality and why I kind of have. I mean, obviously we need to have we need to structure our government because there's so many people that there needs to be multiple layers of federal, state, local, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess I just get the sense of is that for me and Adam, when we look at morality is all based around, at its core, is based around an in-group and an out-group. And it's about creating, this is just kind of the way humans evolve to operate, is that, they create certain rules that apply to the in-group, and then the out-group you can demonize and shit on and whatever. And this is why we see in politics, it's so easy for people to be hypocritical. It's because, they'll hold the out-group to the highest of standards, and then they'll be all forgiveness and smiles and roses to the in-group. And I guess I worry with sort of this, let's keep dividing things down to the local level, that's not going to work because it's just creating too many out-groups when there needs to be a unified in-group identity that everyone in America can identify with. Otherwise, they won't care.
So you're saying something on the lines of like, because of how,
Well, I'm saying, I guess, like, in like part of the reason why, and I know it's a dirty word. Why the reason why I'm in favor of colorblindness is the goal, even if you need to implement affirmative action policies to get there, is that in my mind is literally the only way in which to broaden the in-group so that people won't be racist, is if they don't actually care about these things.
Well,
and I do think it's possible. I do think that's an achievable future. I mean, and I do think we were moving in that direction positively for many years.
Maybe there's another way. Maybe it's not necessarily going to colorblind frameworks, but maybe we have to try our best to resist racialization from the outside. So I would say we're kind of in this box, right? In this house of racialization. We understand that
what is racialization?
Just the action of ascribing someone to be of a particular race. Like, for example, we know that race is kind of bullshit. We know that this is something that we reaffirm. We understand that there are differences based on where we live, like ethnic differences. But when it comes to race, the floor is very, very, it's like rice paper reinforced with concrete. Like there's something real there, but it has nothing to do with race. And sometimes what happens is that we affirm ourselves to be something, and then society affirms us to be something else, or even to be that thing. So like I would say that I am a racially identifiably Black American, but at the same time, if I'm in another country, that's not going to matter. Me being Black might not even matter. So what utility does that have in the broader scheme of the world? And I think that it's possible for us to resist racialization when it happens. And for now, just explore the concept of like, how could we navigate in a world where we understand that race exists, not because like it's real, quote unquote, but that's just sort of the conditions that we're under currently. But what are some ways where we can explore moving past that and moving to a better identification of what issues are? Where is it because a group of individual, like through happenstance, right? You're going to have a community. I'll give like a bit more concrete of an example where it's like, we understand that certain communities are struggling in the United States, and there are racialized outcomes of that. And we ought to recognize that. But at the same time, like, how do we alleviate the circumstances that lead to things that society deems poor? Like, I don't think we want people getting blasted in cities or in really any area, mind you. We don't want people getting blasted in America. But this is the conditions that we're under. So how do we alleviate that? One side saying, get rid of guns. And I tell that side, shut the fuck up. Guns are awesome. So what are some other ways of exploring that with that sort of phenomena? I don't know if that encapsulated what I was saying, but I tried. I tried to be short that time.
Well, it sounds like what you're saying is that I don't know. It sounds like you're saying you agree that we should be moving towards some kind of colorblind future.
I wouldn't say color blindness.
You can't say that now. That's like illegal.
Well, I want to make a distinction. When I say colorblind, I just mean not like if you not judging someone on the basis of their skin color. But I'm not saying not to be racism blind and not to acknowledge that past racism, has affected communities in ways that might require, focus on to some extent. But the goal at the end of the day should be that this idea of white or Black doesn't really exist in people's minds or matter.
Yeah. So I'll send something right now about, and maybe if you guys have some time in whenever the after of this exists, the idea I'm talking about, like this concept, came from Dr. Carlos Hoyt. And he's kind of really, I'll send it to you in Twitter, Adam.
On Twitter or the Zoom chat.
Yeah. Because this kind of,
send it to me on Twitter and I'll get it to Sitch.
Yeah. So like the idea that he talks about a lot is ideas of like racialization and resisting race. So like the concepts of resisting race and the concepts of resisting racialization. And basically a portion of his argument revolves around the idea that like this very thing of racialized people, like basically Black people, white people, Asian people, Latinx people, is basically a false bottom. That there's something real here in terms of like grouping people together like this as it's happening, but it's more of a question of why do we continue to do this if we know it's like it's not leading to the things that we want. And it was the first book that I read that's kind of like explored that idea. It's a really heavy book. Like it took me about like 5 reads and annotations to get through it in a way that I could even like articulate that idea. And heads up, if you do watch it, the way that he talks takes a couple times to get, but like I'm kind of with it in that. Where,
well, I mean, the reason we do it is because we evolved to do that. We
yeah,
evolved to exist in small tribes and to look at other human tribes. Now, obviously, race wasn't a factor because we're talking about cave people who were not crossing race lines. But you look at the other tribe and you'd say, this tribe is competing against me for resources, so they are a potential threat. And then that tendency has been passed down through human to human to human. And once humans do develop the technology to start crossing large distances of the continents and start interacting with people of different skin colors, it's just very easy for that tribal evolved tendency to then hitch on to one of the most visually identifiable thing about a person, which is their skin color or their facial characteristics.
And then what happens is that like people don't have the wherewithal I'm speaking specifically particular time, particular setting, right? Whereas like people didn't have the wherewithal of knowing, okay, the way we're doing this is actually total bullshit. And then like even in America, we saw that in real time where it's like, okay, are Italians white people? And for the long time, that answer was explicitly no, until it was a means of like perpetual, like not perpetual, but contradictions within the idea. Or it's like, okay, if you do convert to Christianity, then you are free because that's what the Bible says. And then it's like, wait, there's a contradiction there, because if we Christianize an entire group of people that we deem inferior to us, then how are we supposed to use them for labor if they're free? It's like, so we'll put an exception in there. And then what happens is over time, you get like this sort of process of rationalizing, justifying, and normalizing these things. And then what sucks for us is that we had to deal with the consequences of that. Of like, sure, we've tried to make efforts of so that doesn't happen anymore. But at the same time, like there's still like small remnants of these policies or small remnants of just not addressing it. And then sometimes, as we saw with like just passing lynching legislation at the federal level, you'll get people pushing back in weird ways.
I think the slave example is a very good example in terms of religion, is that you had a bunch of religious Christian individuals who were very anti-slavery, and they said, okay, the way we're going to try to get society on board with abolishing slavery is we're going to convert all the slaves to be Christians.
Yeah.
And then in response to that, the people who materially benefited from slavery, the slavers, they said, well, let's construct some kind of bullshit, workaround to get around that. And and I guess I feel like I'm on the position of, even though I'm not Christian, I feel like I'm the Christian person saying, okay, we need to draw everyone into the in-group here. And yeah, I understand there's always going to be the slavers or the whomever who are going to keep trying to twist the rules of society for whatever reason, whether it's ideological or based on some material interest. But to me, it's like this continual push and pull of, okay, in-group, and then they get pulled to the out-group, in-group, pulled out-group. And it seems like that's kind of the direction America has been going. But at least to me, it seems like we're still, one step forward, one step back, one step to the side. We're still progressing. We're still moving towards the city, the shining city on the hill. And I kind of view like the kind of wokeness that has come in from the last 6 years is kind of dismantling a lot of the progress that we're making towards that.
Yeah. And I think that to some extent, like there is a need to kind of look at a system and say like, should we do this? Should we ought to do this? But at the same time, not every, it's kind of weird to say, but not every idea is going to allow for sort of incremental reform, right? Certain ideas and certain concepts are basically questioning the entire institution as a whole. And
like you just abolish slavery, it's not like
and then like what happens is like you need to have sort of two things happening at the same time. You need to kind of have the social support to do the thing while also having the political means to do so. And I think sometimes we see that what people might want socially isn't there legislatively. And then those who are in positions of power might just not even care about it yet. And that's kind of always what I find interesting, where it's like, how do we know when these things actually are aligned and that there is a point of attack? So I will say that conservative found something with CRT. It worked. They got what? I think it's like 30 plus states. I think it was only 16 that passed something, 16 or 18. That's still a lot, all things considered.
Yeah.
So they found something. I would argue that I don't think it's a policy or something that they should advocate for. So I think that it was just kind of like a snapshot. But I don't know.
Okay. I mean, I'm not exactly sure where we agree or disagree.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, man. Like,
that's fine.
I think one of the problems is people kind of posit me as a political streamer and somebody who's like a debater or something. And it's like, look, I just want to talk to people, and I understand that this space. When I say this space, I mean like people who talk about politics,
internet politics.
Well, you've come to the right place, Joe. We just like to get to know you before we go full assault. Before we completely destroy you,
or we shove the knife in your back,
and
tell
if
us
you,
where your weak spots are.
Because at the end of the day, it's like, look, man, like you're Americans, I hope, and I'm an American, allegedly.
God
so
bless.
therefore, it's like all
God
we're trying
bless.
to do, all I'm trying to do is make sure I make it back to the same place I went to bed at.
all right,
And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Because at the end of the day, it's like I don't think any of us want to see like bad things happen to people.
No,
it's just that we just disagree on like what that path looks like. And I think that's like the best part about being American, like being able to talk to people and like posit ideas and
free speech.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're in Jersey. It sounds very safe. I like to hear that.
where I live is safe for liberal reasons, and I'll take it for now.
I've lived in some rough areas, so I know it weighs on the psyche, definitely. So let's I have one last question for you, and it circles back to this negative stereotypes thing again. You said to Vosh you wanted to have a white identity panel. An all white identity panel. What the fuck?
What is the white identity
what
panel?
the fuck?
Can I tell you what I've noticed happening, and then maybe you might kind of. I think you'd be on board with this.
Okay,
but I'm doubtful. But let's hear it.
Okay, so hear me out. I've noticed that for the longest time, white Americans never really have to. I don't want to say worry about their racialization, but deal with it in sort of like an everyday fashion. And what I noticed is that there's sort of two things happening. There are people who recognize themselves to be white, and that there's like sort of like that different privilege narratives and stuff like that, and that we ought to do better not only by people who are considered to be non-white, but we have to look towards our privilege and acknowledge our privilege and yada yada yada. But then I also see another side where it's like, okay, I'm white, but who gives a shit? But I understand that people call me cracker and it makes my feelings hurt. So what's going on there? And I'm kind of curious about that, because I do think that while there are conversations about race, there aren't really a lot of conversations about, and maybe it's just because of like my spaces I'm exposed to, of like the broader conversation online about what it means to be white in America, or to be like white in what we know as the West. Granted, to be fair, something very clear, there is a group of people who do overtly talk about that shit.
Yes, and they're the people, I don't know, it seem like they're the ones that want the blacks to not exist anymore.
And
back to your thing.
That's the part that's really dicey.
Well, there's two extremes though. And like when you're talking about having, a white identity panel, and you explicitly asked Vosh to join this, I don't want Vosh to represent me as a white dude. What the fuck?
Well, that's the thing. Like, socialist. I've had this panel on my mind for about 6 months. I don't want Nick
Fuentes representing me. I don't want Vosh representing me.
Bro, that's been the weirdest thing, because it's like, on one hand, my mind goes, I want a diverse group of people.
Yeah, but this is the thing, though. This is the the stereotype thing. Like, this is what we have to fight.
Wait, what? I still don't understand what the white identity panel even is.
Yeah, well, that's the thing where what I've been trying to do, I think like the best way of approaching it is to, instead of it having being this kind of like broad idea of like sort of generic, what does it mean to be white, but pinning it with more like observable stories that are happening in the local politic broadly. And so like, for instance, the one example, like the one article that I've been sort of fiddling around that I would use is just the legislation around critical race theory as it is for white Americans, because that's explicit. Like in some aspects, like the politicians who were writing it explicitly had the goal of making it to protect white people.
But I still don't. So is this you want to have a panel of white people of varying political persuasions to talk about political issues pertaining to white people? Is that what?
Yeah, and like, and even what it means to be culturally white in the United States, or be like identifiably, like racially identifiably white in the United States, and how that manifests. The problem is, as Adam brings it up, is that every time I go through topics, and it might just be something that's going to be stuck in production hell, where every time I think I have a good number of topics and people I want to invite, a part of me kind of second guesses it, because it's like I'm always imagining the best situation and worst situation that happens with a panel and a conversation, and I kind of like teeter that to determine if I want to do it. And every time I do it, it's like, no, this is going to be like some weird fucking.
Well, if you can get Nick Fuentes and Vosh to debate what it is to be white, I think you've definitely got some YouTube gold there. I think.
Well, I mean, well,
that's the thing where it's like I think it's smaller. Like a part of me wants to go full. A part of me wants to dive completely into madness and full invite clickbait, and get like fucking Lauren Southern, King here. Lauren Witzke, Destiny Vosh.
Don't get Lauren Witzke. She'll just yell over everybody. She's it's too crazy.
There's this dude who's part of the
one of the things that I think you could describe in sort of a privilege type way is the ability, like, not to think of yourself as a racial category first. So I feel like I have benefited from that. I've thought that we were trying to extend that same privilege to all racial categories, where racial categories don't necessarily matter. So I feel like this is huge steps backwards. Now we're inviting people to talk about, I mean, that's going to create all sorts of conflict.
Yeah, or even the question that you posited might even be even better, because that's actually something that I was thinking about too, of that maybe the premise that I'm trying to do isn't what I'm looking to do at all. Where maybe it's like, okay, we understand that racial identification is very, very loose. And every once in a while, we kind of get challenged as to like what it really means. And then maybe there's something to that discussion that doesn't need to be exclusively white people talking about it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then the question is, okay, how do you pin that, right? Like, for example, with like Rachel Dolezal, right? Cool person. But something that I think she knocks to is that there is a level of truth to her experience, where it's like, what do you do if you reject the culture that you find yourself in and then adopt a new one? Like, what does that mean for you as an American? And what does that mean for the whole like process of racialization in the first place? And that's like a really weird thing, because she's not the best person to the encapsulation of that idea. Because we've seen like people finding themselves in a certain situation and presenting in such a way that isn't quite what people might believe them to present themselves as. And there is a little bit of essentialism there. Yeah. But it happens. Like, but again, it's like, I'm curious about that, not people sort of like navigate around that. But at the same time, it's almost like there's not enough of a sample size. I honestly don't think we're quite there yet to have a conversation that isn't like overt content farming, because I hate that shit, man. Like, I understand it's really monetarily attractive, but it's just I've seen so many panel hosts sit through that turmoil. Yeah. I'm just like, I that ain't me.
This is like Dylan Burns, bread and butter. Chaotic Entertainment for $20 says, Sitch, relax, Adam. White Guy Wednesday is just a joke. Joe Lewis. Well, hold on. we had a gag on last week's show where Sitch was talking about White Guy Wednesday, and I was very distraught about it.
That's where all the white people come together to plan how to control
that's
the
where
world.
People hide. That's where people don't have to hide their power level.
I thought that was just golf games. Wasn't that the whole meme for a while?
Yeah, that's on Wednesday.
I'm just saying, like I have a lot of evidence to support this claim, but I would say golf is the whitest sport in America right now. I think that now to have a little bit of embracement and diversity. I don't know how you start, but
Sitch, do you have any closing thoughts before we get back to work and say goodbye to Joe?
No, I think it was a good conversation. I'm glad Joe came by. I'm still not 100% sure what we agree or disagree with, but
talk to me with my I sound pretty good because I'm medicated to shit.
Okay, but you're like barely hanging on here. You're slipping from the chair.
Well, it's more of that like, listen, man. I got the flu shot and still got the flu, so I'm getting a little radicalized.
I say, well, do you have COVID? Is that what's happening?
No, I got the COVID. I got my COVID test back today, and it was negative.
Okay,
and then I just asked my doctor, like, what do I do? And then she's just like, it's the flu. And I'm like, okay, great, thanks.
Go home, be sick.
Listen, those flu shots are a scam, okay? Because it's always like last year's flu that you get the flu shot for. It's never for like the year you're currently.
Well, that was the thing, bro. Oh my god, that's what radicalized me, because I had last year's flu, and I'm like, what do you mean last year's flu? And she's like, how did I get last year's flu and all this masking and so? Oh, I was so mad.
I say, well, at least it's not COVID. Adam had COVID in it.
Uh-oh.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah, it's let me tell you something, like, because I'm on the back end of this, but it kind of petrified me because I was doing pretty good with not getting COVID, and then like I started feeling my throat kind of fucked up on like Wednesday, and I'm like, no way, no. Like the whole time I woke up on Friday or Thursday, I was like, no. Because like I just don't feel like spring break for me is literally next week. I need to make it 1, 2, 3, 4 days. 4 days. And then I don't care how sick I get. But thankfully like my job at the school for this week is like administrative focus, so I'm not gonna be around kids or anything like that. So like I could do my work at home, which is nice, but
that's good.
But still, it's like, come on, bro. Like I'm trying to get that perfect attendance sticker that doesn't exist, but it exists in my paycheck of not taking off days.
Well, thanks for coming on, Joe. We'll have to do this again.
Yeah. You know, real talk. My door is always open. If you ever want to like kick it, even if it's like shit that's not about race, I'm labeled as like the race guy on the internet, and it's like there's so much other shit to talk about. But
yeah, I agree.
My door, my door is always open if you guys want to fight about anything. It's fun. And
well, what's your most controversial take? Leave with us your most controversial
take. Democrats are not going to save you.
Okay, that's not controversial at all.
That's so
not controversial at all.
No,
my space is that's a hot take.
You understand? Okay, our audience is like pretty split 50-50 whether they like Democrats or not.
Damn, so I can't say Chris Rock didn't go far enough. That take doesn't work here.
No.
We're in agreement.
That is the take. Okay, good. I see where we're at. I don't know. I have to think of something.
Chris Rock is still working. I mean, it's still a game in progress, though. Who knows how it's going to go.
That man, like, if you look back at that clip, he smiled.
He was a professional. Definitely. Yeah.
He smiled because he knew, I don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
But I do think though that if I got slapped in the face by Will Smith, I'm on the ground. I'm just gonna go on the ground. I'm gonna need 5 people to get me up. I might find a way to throw up after. I'll make a whole. I'll spend the Academy Awards for 30 minutes getting me off, and then you'll see like Amy Schumer on stage, all nervous, like I don't know what these words are. Like, yeah, oh man, like I'm just saying.
Aiden Powden for $10. Thank you, Aiden. Says, we often disagree, but I really appreciate y'all having opposing positions on the stream. Well, thank you, Aiden. And thank you for blocking the porn bot that was spamming the chat recently.
But anyway, I'll think of something. I'll put it in chat at one point.
All right.
I did subscribe to your channel, so
awesome.
Take care, Joe.
So
take care.
Take care, guys.
Feel better.
Thank you.
Thank you, group username, for joining the Free Will Seekers.
That was cool.
So that was I guess I'm still not 100% on Joe's position, but I feel like it was a productive conversation. I felt productive towards the end, so I'm banking on that.
We'll see how the Bosch fans lash out at him. And we're going late. We didn't really, there was a lot of fallout over that clip. And people were openly calling him racist, which just seemed like a contradiction. I was like, can't you see he's black? You can't believe he's racist. That's impossible. You're on the left.
Right.
I guess the left is breaking down now. They're accepting the fact that black people can, in fact, be racist, which, that's a good,
shocking.
It's a step in the right direction, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, and I want to do it, but I guess, he couldn't do it because of timing. I would like to do where we watch videos with people together.
Yes, yeah.
Because that generally breeds a lot of conversation, but, maybe that'll be for next time.
Well, he can come back. The first time usually is like a meet and greet kind of,
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And you're so mean to people. It's hard to get them in.
Me?
No, I'm just kidding, obviously.
I'm mean.
No, Joe is a good sport. And I feel like we did push back. Obviously people let us know in the comments. So,
right.
And we'll clip this out and make it a standalone video as well. So,
okay. Well, let's get back to John McWhorter. We'll finish up what John McWhorter says, then we'll get back to John Oliver.
Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch and Adams show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our live show right here on this channel on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want, you can super chat us. We read $20 and up super chats on the show and then do a follow-up stream on the following Tuesday where we read the rest of the unread super chats and interact with fans of the show. Subscribe to this channel right here to listen to the live show or to listen to more of our awesome clips.